the opportunity that we have to take a little bit of time off from the national holiday of Canada Day, which I don't know how many of us know how much pertinent history that brought to this day. Doesn't matter. It's a day off, and it's a day of learning more Torah, which is a tremendous opportunity. And we, in the Kollel, we learned the halachot of Baltalin, the subject of paying one's worker on time. And this is relevant to each and every one of us. Not only those of us who have employees or who are employees, but we always take a babysitter, take a ride by a taxi cab, or hire a contractor. All of these different scenarios come with it a great deal of responsibility according to the Torah. Let me just give you the following scenario. There is a bank robber that breaks into a bank, and he holds up the bank and he says, "Give me all your money," and he takes all the money and he runs off. A week later, the bank manager gathers up all the employees and he says, "You should know we're going through difficult times. We had a major robbery. I can't pay everyone over here. I know I was supposed to pay everyone. I'm cutting everyone's salary, even retroactively, not from now on, even retroactively. I'm only giving you 80% of your salary." So according to the Torah, who is a bigger villain? It's the bank robber or it's the bank manager? So the bank robber, as terrible as he is, violated the prohibition of lo tigzol, of stealing. However, the boss, we learned in the Gemara, those of us who got to it, that if somebody withholds wages from a worker, he violates 5 prohibitions. The shach, in the beginning of Siman Shin Lamitet, we all have it in our sheets. I believe it's page 4. We all have it in our sheets. The shach, if we want to look at the source, I'm sorry, the Yisma'h, actually, the Me'irot Enaim, in Od Dalid, the Me'irot Enaim on the side, Od Dalid. Those of you who know where it is, point out to those who can't find it. Says the Gemara says we have how many prohibitions? Number 1, lo tigzol. Number 2, lo ta'ashok schar sachir. Number 3, lo ta'ashok et re'echa. Number 4, lo talin. Number 5, lo tavo la'shemesh. And just for the bonus, a positive mitzvah of not paying a worker, which is also something. We all put on tefillin today, but this is tefillin is a positive mitzvah, and paying one's worker on time is a mitzvah. So the boss is pretty much in bad shape as well. And we're going to see in what conditions he violated the prohibition. We're going to see in what conditions what's called v'yeshlo or what's not called, if he had or not. So if the boss is going to fulfill the prohibition, the conditions that we will speak about now, in what framework one violates the prohibitions, it's going to be very serious. Now, usually it doesn't come to this. A person doesn't just withhold wages and doesn't pay a worker. Rather, and if he does, sometimes he has a claim. And he says, "Well, you didn't fulfill your job," and then that's a legal claim. That's he's saying you didn't do your job and you did your job, and that's something that's up to Bet Din. That's something that's up to Bet Din. And however, there's going to be instances where a worker, and like all of us, we pay late. We pay late. Now, when one pays late, he doesn't violate all of these 5 things that I mentioned. You're not stealing. A person is just paying late. So then there is the prohibition of lo tavo alav hashemesh, and then there's the positive commandment of b'yomot titil zecharo. So there's a positive mitzvah that one has to fulfill, that one missed out on fulfilling, and then there's the negative mitzvah that one didn't pay. So that's going to be most of our discussion, and we are going to learn today that in order to have the opportunity of fulfilling the mitzvah v'yomot titil zecharo and chas v'shalom violating the opportunity of paying a worker, there will have to be 4 conditions in place. There will have to be 4 conditions in place, and we're going to start with just reading the Pesukim in the Torah. There are 2 Pesukim that deal specifically with workers' wages. One is in Parashat Kiddushim in Sefer Vayikra. It says the following: Lo ta'asu avel b'mishpat. Velo pasuk Yud Gimel, lo ta'ashok et re'echa velo tigzol, and you shouldn't steal. Velo talin pe'ulat sachir itchad boker, and you shouldn't remain with the wages of your worker overnight. And the Gemara is going to discuss that means a worker in the time where pre-electricity, he would work from sunbreak, from when the sun comes out, till sunset. So at sunset, he's finished working, so you have the whole night to pay him. And if the morning comes up and you didn't pay him, the Torah says you violated bal talin. Lo talin, the Gemara calls it bal talin. Then you have in Sefer Dvarim, in Parashat Kitetse, a similar subject. And the pasuk over there says, in a positive command, biyomot titen secharo, and as well a negative commandments, velo tavo alav hashemesh, and the sun shouldn't set. And the Gemara says, what does that mean, the sun shouldn't set? That means we're talking about a worker who works the night shift, all night. He works from the time when the sun comes down till daybreak, when the sun comes up. Then you have the whole day to pay him. You didn't pay him the whole day, and the sun came down already. You violated lo tavo alav hashemesh. 2 different prohibitions on two different workers. So that, you see, that's an excellent subject that I knew I was going to be asked as one of the first questions. So in our group we discussed this. Is this only applied to Jews? Now, regarding many mitzvot, it's written only lire'echa, and which excludes non-Jews, and you obviously would have to pay because of chilul Hashem and everything else. But what about the mitzvah of biyomot titen secharo? Do you fulfill a positive obligation when you pay your non-Jewish worker? What would you say? What would you say? Do you pay the positive commandment of biyomot titen secharo? Besides this table, what would be? Do you fulfill a positive commandment?
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't mention that. I know that's right.
It's not mentioned anywhere. It's not mentioned anywhere. So we have a Rambam over here. We found that they bring down a Rambam in Sefer Mitzvot. Mitzvah Resh says the following. He shetzivanu latet schar asachir beyomo velo ye'achrenu liyom acher. There's a positive commandment to give a worker's wages on that day, and one shouldn't delay it. And the Rambam writes, this is mechuyav bechol sachir. This is in every type of worker. Ben goy ben Yisrael mitzvat aseh liforo bezmano. Whether a non-Jew or a Jew, there is a mitzvat aseh. About a prohibition of not paying a Jew, I don't know. It's not written anywhere. They bring a story from the previous Belzer Rebbe, of Aaron Mibelz, that he said that it's very possible that there's also a negative commandment of lo tavo alav hashemesh or baltalin, also by a non-Jew. However, it's not clear whether one violates a negative commandment. The Stehemet talks about it. But in the sources we have a Rambam that discusses that even a non-Jew, one has a positive commandment of paying him on time. Now this is besides the issues of chilul Hashem and stealing and everything else, which is just like any other section. But this specific subject, yes, does apply of paying on time. Now, what are the conditions? Let us learn a little bit of Gemara. We have the Mishnah in Daf Kuf Yud Amud Bet, which in the source sheets it's page 1. They'll have the source sheet thing that way I can be able to follow. There, everyone. So it's page 1.
When you say paying a worker, paying a worker, what about if I rent out things from him?
Yes. So we're going to see that it's only about a worker, and we're going to discuss what would be by somebody who is selling me something. How do we define a sale, and how do we define a worker? Right. Okay. So, what are the conditions? So let's read the Mishnah in Daf Kuf Yud Amud Bet, where we start the underlines. I'm going to skip around in the time of the Gemara because we don't have time to do all of the Gemara from beginning to end, unless everyone just wants to stay here till 6 o'clock, and then we have Mincha. Otherwise, we are going to have a shorter Shiur. So that means we're going to condense. Sechir yom gove kol halayla. So one who works all day is able to collect all night. That we learned from the Torah. Sechir layla gove kol hayom. And one who works all night collects all day. Sechir sha'ot, which is the most relevant because that's what we have. Somebody who works by the hour. Gove kol halayla v'chol hayom. Collects all night and all day. The Gemara is going to say that this is a discussion between Rav and Shmuel. And the halacha is like Rav, that somebody who works for a couple of hours, he has till that day. In other words, he finishes off early, he has till that day. So nowadays in Toronto, Shkia is at close to 9 o'clock. Yeah, it's close to 9 o'clock. So if a worker stops working at 6 o'clock p.m., you have 3 more hours to pay him. And if 9 o'clock came and you didn't pay him, you violated lo tavo alav hashemesh, baltalin, you violated one negative commandment and a positive commandment of biyomot iten secharo. That's what the Mishnah says. And it talks about a schir chodesh, a monthly worker when he finishes his month, schir shana when he finishes his year, schir shavua when he finishes his 7 years. Shavua over here, Rashi says, is shmita. Yatsa bayom gove kol hayom, he finishes during the day, he gets paid on that day. And schir sha'ot was that he finishes that hour. Yatsa balayla gove kol haylayla v'chol hayom, also he finishes at night, he collects all night and all day. And we discussed that the Gemara says it's a machloket, and really he has that period of time where he finished. So if a person finishes a half hour before nightfall, one would have to pay him within that half hour if one is able, if it's a reasonable amount of time somebody's allowed to cross the street in the bank to get the money, or he doesn't. The Chafetz Chaim discusses it's not necessarily so that he has an obligation to prepare all the money beforehand. There has to be, in other words, if he finished 2 minutes before sunset, it's not fair to say you have to pay him. He only has 2 minutes to get the money. That's not reasonable, and it's interesting. It's not an obligation beforehand to prepare it.
What about on Shabbat?
On exactly the same thing on Shabbat as well. If somebody finishes on Friday day, he would not have a prohibition of the Chafetz Chaim discusses that, right? On Shabbat, he would not have the prohibition. I forget what his maskana is. The Chafetz Chaim has a whole sefer called Avat Chesed on this subject.
Even though it's a mitzvah,
I think he's not sure. I think he has a suffix whether you'd be able to pay him, but it's not ikar adin. I think he ends off, if I'm not mistaken, that one could push it off till Motzei Shabbat because that's the first opportunity that he has, but he's not going to fulfill the mitzvah. The mitzvah is a window of time that you have. You didn't get that window of time, you lost it. So, in a practical sense, if somebody brings a babysitter in his house and the babysitter finished working and one has the money in his pocket, but he just sends her home and he doesn't pay her, and it was expected that she should be paid that day. It's not like every time she comes and she has that knowledge and you have the money and you hired her, so you missed out on a mitzvah taseh, a precious mitzvah taseh that costs a lot of money we spend a lot of money for an etrog, we spend a lot of money for our tefillin, and this is something that's free because we're going to have to pay anyways, and we lose the opportunity. And not only that, in this case where she's waiting for her payment, you have the money, and there was no agreement otherwise, you violate a lo taseh. You violated lo taseh. So that's something that we just have to be aware, because it's so easy. It's just the awareness, and that's one of the reasons why I picked this subject, because I feel that if we just have a simple awareness of this, then we'll be able to maneuver much more carefully. And we're going to see that there are certain situations which is difficult. Let's turn to the Gemara, the next page.
If she has the money but she doesn't have change, like it's $6 and I have a $10 bill. So a lot of times says, okay, forget, tomorrow I'll give it to you the exact change. So it's my responsibility to have exact change.
You give her more and she has to give you back. That's it.
Yeah, I guess that would.
You have to pay.
That's not called itcha. Are you obligated to lend? I think if we're going to see that you're obligated, according to some opinions, to sell some items in order to get, so at least change, to wait for the change till tomorrow, you'd be obligated. What do the Chashuv Avreichim say over here? What do you say to the case? Huh? Okay, page 2. A check. A check, most poskim understand that it's fine because they accept it that way. Some say it's only if the banks are open and then they can cash in the check on the spot. Others say that a check is a fine form of currency, especially I wanted to ask this question to the public. Let's say on a day like today, on Canada Day, let's say I have a $10,000 check or something. There are these cash exchange places that you give the check in. Is there any place? Yeah, we spoke about this yesterday. Is there any place that you could find somewhere open today?
Yes.
So in other words, that would be a big difference, because if I give somebody a check today, so what am I supposed to do with the check today? Everything's closed. Technically, it's not true. Technically, they could. I mean, they might not, and they might not want to lose the money, but that's their issue. But technically, it has worth. Could be that the check has worth.
But not $10,000.
It could be, yeah. On the contrary, they'll take a little bit more of a percentage. They'll be happier with that check. If you bring the proper supporting documents, they will happily take your money.
Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry. They'll do it.
Today you can deposit it into your ATM. Like,
Yeah, it'll take another 6 days. Like, oh.
you take money out of it.
Yeah. Okay. Next Gemara. Now, next Gemara says like this. About 6 lines from the about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines, 9 lines from the top. Rabba bar Rav Huna. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna. Rabba bar Rav Huna says, Hani shukai de surah. The shuk of a place of surah, which is in Babylonia. Lo avri mishum baltalin. They don't violate the prohibition of baltalin. Meda yad'i de al yoma de shuke samchi. They know that you're relying on the day of the shuk. We spoke about an example that if somebody is works for a catering company, and we spoke about this in our learning group beforehand, and if they know that even though the worker finishes and the caterer spent a lot of money, the one who's in charge, and he's waiting to get paid from the person of the party who's going to at 3 a.m. pay him after he gets all whatever money he has. So they know that he's only going to get his money at 3 o'clock. So even if they left before 9 o'clock p.m. when it was sunset, it's fine, because they know that they're getting paid the next day. Now, he didn't fulfill the mitzvah. He didn't violate lo tavo alav hashemesh. But if the worker technically doesn't, everyone knows that the boss pays them afterwards, because that's when he has his cash flow, it would be okay. And Rabbi Ben Solomon has a validated complaint over here. Let's go. Let's hear.
Just so you know that the way caterers work nowadays, that you don't start the function unless you pay up front.
Unless you pay up front. Okay.
Okay,
So then it would be different. But let us just say that it's a Hamish caterer that he says, oh, you know, when you get your money, you'll pay me. And the workers all know that they're working for a Hamish guy like that. So then there wouldn't be a violation. But you're right. If the agreement is beforehand, then there's no question. Okay, let's learn one more Gemara before we get to the bottom line on page 3. Yes.
In case they work overtime, so you paid them.
Yes, you have to pay them when they finish their overtime.
So no, they already got prepaid in this case.
That's fine. They brought prepaid. You fulfill your mitzvah. You prepay.
No, actually, that's the shaila I have, like on Shabbos. Like you have a schar yom. It's
Yeah.
gonna work for you. That cleaning lady, you pay her at the end of every day on Friday.
Right.
She finishes like basically 10 minutes before Shabbat because your kids are going crazy. So what do you do? It's a mitzvah aseh over a mitzvah lo aseh.
Right. So if you have the 10 minutes that you'd be able to pay her, and it's a reasonable amount of time. I don't know if 10 minutes is that. In other words, for you be able to go to the bank and get that money. The Chafetz Chaim has that suffix.
Right. Should I be over Shabbat nights? Am I allowed
Obviously
to be over?
not. Obviously not.
It's a mitzvah aseh.
It's like you're not able to. Yeah, but it's like you're not. It's not that you're. The Torah wouldn't obligated you in such a instance to pay on Shabbat. So you just would forfeit the mitzvah taseh, but you wouldn't violate the negative commandment. You wouldn't violate the negative commandment. The mitzvah taseh is only at the time. It's a window of opportunity. You lost that opportunity. You didn't get the mitzvah taseh, but you didn't violate the mitzvah taseh if it's you're not able to. I don't know if 10 minutes. I think the Chafetz Chaim is not sure about 10 minutes, if that's a reasonable amount of time to run and come back. Yeah.
Make a condition before.
Yeah, if you make so that I think that's one lesson that we're going to learn out of this learning today. That always make a condition that I'm going to pay you on time, but if I'm not able to pay you on time, we have an agreement that I don't violate any isser, and that would be okay. And that would be okay. You know that you're safe regarding not violating chas v'shalom a negative commandment. Now the last thing, and this is quite important. In page 3, Tanu Rabbanan, lo talin peulat sachir. It says in the pasuk, "Lo talin pe'olat tzachir yachol afilu lo tavo." Let's say he didn't demand the money. Talmud lomar itcha leda'atcha. He has to demand it. He has to demand it. In other words, that you know about it, that he demanded it. And this is going to be a very important next condition. Yachol afilu en lo. Could it be even if he doesn't have? Talmud lomar itcha. Sheyesh itcha. You have to have the money. If you don't have the money, it says in the pasuk, "Lo talin pe'olat tzachir itcha." You have to have it. If you don't have the money, you didn't violate any prohibition. And there's one more Gemara. If we turn back to page 2, and this is going to be another condition, that we have a story about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the top. Maremar amarle l'sham'eh. Maremar told his worker, Zil, agirli po'alim ve'em olim schar chel balabayit. Go hire workers and tell them that they are working for the balabait. And the Gemara says beforehand, that anytime one hires a worker through an agent, one doesn't violate the isur of baltalin. One doesn't violate the prohibition of baltalin. So, with all this information, we could summarize the following. The only time where somebody is going to violate the negative prohibition of not paying one's worker on time is if he has 4 conditions in place. Number 1 is that the time frame came that he was supposed to pay him. Number 1 is that the time frame came where he was supposed to pay him. Number 2 is that the employer has money and is not paying him. Number 3 is that the worker demands the money, and number 4 is that the worker is hired directly through the employer and not through an agent. Those are the 4 conditions. And we're going to go through each and every one of the conditions and speak in detail in what instances they're liable and what instances they're not liable. Number 1, and we mentioned a lot of cases already. The time came. If it is accepted and it is something that is known, that the only time that they get paid is when they have money. This happens very often. Baruch Hashem. Not over here, but in other places that they know that only when they're going to get their funds in. Schools, it happens a lot of times. The workers know that they're dependent upon the board, that when the board is able to get the money, that's when they get paid. In that type of way, the workers and the employers do not violate baltalin, because it is accepted that they know when the money is coming in, and it's similar to the Gemara that we learned. It's like the Yom HaDeshuka. It's like the day of the marketplace. When they know that that's when the cash flow comes in, that's when they are getting paid. So that's condition number 1. What happens? This is a big question. Yeah.
They tell you the money's there, but we have to wait till the check's clear.
That doesn't work. That's like you're not giving him money. What does it help that you have a mashkun in your hand? You don't fulfill the mitzvah or get away from the thing with a mashkun. It has to be a real payment. That doesn't help. That's not called itcha. Now, I'm sorry. That's not called. Now, if they don't have money, that's something else. But if that, and that's probably the case, that they're saying they don't have money. But we're going to see in a moment what it means not having money. Now, what I was speaking to Rabbi Nadav before, and this is many times a person is under a yearly or a 2-year contract that every month they get paid. Every month they get paid. So are they only is the employer only going to violate the prohibition after 2 years, because that's when he finishes his job, and everything else is within the job? So over here in the Sefer Mishpat HaPolim discusses this, and he says that it could very well be that if you agreed beforehand that every month you will get paid, so it's like every month is a new time period of payment, and you would have a positive commandment on paying on that time. But once again, if it was agreed upon that I'm only paying you when I have the money, and he knows that, and the worker knows that, so there would be no violation, no prohibition. There's always going to be a negative commandment of bal teshaheh, of withholding money when one has it, but it's only when one has it, and if one doesn't have it, there's no prohibition. And this is, and we're going to get to the big question in a moment, but let's first finish the 4 details. Number 2, it's only if it's itcha, that you have the money. What is that called, having the money? What is that called, having the money? I have at the end of the month, my worker comes to my desk and gives me a pile of bills. And I have X amount of money in the bank, and I have the mortgage to pay, I have the electricity bill to pay, I have repairs to pay, I have suppliers to pay, and I have taxes to pay, and I have payroll to pay. Who comes first? Who comes first? Okay, so what is that? If I don't pay my, Shlomo Kadosh says over here, if I don't pay my mortgage, everyone's going to be in the street. So what? I mean, what is that my issue? I have to feed my family. I understand that you're going to have an issue, but right now, how does the Torah look at it? So it's clear that according to what we learned, if one has all the 4 conditions in place, it's called he has money. The others are loans that he owes a loan to the bank. It's definitely a person has money to pay the payroll first, that it comes first. Not only that, the Ritva says that if one has in his store things that he could sell to the market, he says in his home, assets that he could sell without a substantial loss. Without a substantial loss, one is obligated to do so. Now one would say, of course, to fulfill a positive commandment, you have to sell even 1/5 of your assets. That's different. Over here, you don't have to sell 1/5 of your assets. You don't even have to incur a substantial loss. Because it says itcha. It's not called itcha. What's called itcha? The Ritva defines perot ha'omdim leschora. Fruits that you have that are able to be sold easily. Something that if you have securities that you're going to lose a lot of money out of selling them on the spot. If you have stock options that you're going to lose a substantial amount of selling them on the spot, you're not liable to do so. You're only liable to sell on options that are easy, and you're not going to lose money. But over here he understands that anything that the Ritva meant, that anything that is easy to be sold. So what does that mean, omed lischora? That I'm not going to incur so much loss from it. Okay, so Rabbi Harush is saying it's not true. Rabbi Harush is saying that it's something that I'm only able to sell, I'm willing to sell. It's something I was going to sell anyways. Mm-hmm. Right. He doesn't say like you over here, but it could be that you have a point. Right. I don't know. He has a good point. Rabbi Harush has a good point. I don't know. Okay. Now, so having money means even if you have money in the bank account, if you have assets that are worth money, so why should you not pay your worker? You have now to borrow money. You don't have to borrow money, which is interesting. You don't have to borrow money, but if you have opportunities, to get easy cash, it's not like, okay, I don't have anything in my pocket. It doesn't work that way. You have workers, and that comes before all of the payroll and everything else, unless beforehand you agreed with your workers that that's not the case, and then it's different. So you always have to make sure before you engage a worker, you tell them conditions. Whenever it is, and I'm not setting myself to the times of the Torah that when you finish working I pay you. Now you also won't get the mitzvah, but that's something else.
What about savings? You have to take from this.
Yeah, if you're in a locked savings plan that you're going to incur a great loss from taking them out, you wouldn't be chayiv. But if it's regular savings, then why not?
What's the difference?
Savings is saved for a rainy day. This is a rainy day.
It's earning your money like you can have loss or not. We're talking about regular money, not schora over here. I guess you have regular money.
If you're going to incur a substantial loss, you don't have to.
What's the difference?
It's not omdim leschora. It's not perot omdim leschora. It's not called itcha. It's not called itcha.
It's money. The whole svara of omdim leschora is that something you but you're turning
Yeah, but the
into
Torah
money.
doesn't obligate me from the pasuk of itcha. It doesn't obligate me to lose money. I'm losing money.
That's
Well, you're just not
what's
gaining.
only said by Pirot. You're taking something which is...
No, Ritva says perot. The Torah says itcha. The Gemara says itcha.
Why is that
It
not
has to be
itcha?
itcha.
Why is that not itcha? Why are you saying it's not itcha? You have money with you.
No, if I have to take it out and lose money, that's not called with me.
Why
That's
is that-
selling something. I'm selling something at a great loss.
Why are you selling...
I have securities over here that are worth an amount of money. I have RESPs or whatever, and if I'm gonna sell those RESPs, it's value. It's an asset that I'm losing. See, Rabbi Dan, a young budding Talmid Chacham we have over here, he's saying a very good point. He's saying that it's called I have money in the RESP, so what if I lose it? But that's money that I have that it's worth this much. So I'm saying it could necessarily not be that way. You have an asset over here that you're selling the asset, now it's worth less. You're not obligated from
But it's
itcha.
just savings, it's not assets.
Savings, so that's what he asked. Savings is like regular money. You're able to take it out without incurring a specific loss. Yeah?
The RSP, you're losing that you won't gain money, but
That could also be a loss. That could also be a loss. That could also be a loss. I don't hear it. That could also be a loss. That could also be a loss. Okay.
Rabbi Leb'har,
Yes.
a line of credit, it's not considered your money?
No, you're borrowing.
You're borrowing.
You're borrowing. They're happy to lend you money, but it's not like you have it. It's always easy to borrow money, but then like, then it's like you had the money. It's not like you have the money. It's not like you have the money. It's taking something on a loan.
Time says that you have a mitzvah to borrow.
No, that not mitzad the chiyuv. It's not a chiyuv. It's a ma'ala. It's not called itcha. It's not called itcha. Okay, let's continue. Dalid, the last condition. Ha'oved number 3. Ha'oved tovea etzcharo. Let's say he demands. Okay, number 3 is that only if he demands it. What is called demanding? Let's say he's not in the city, but he knows that you usually pay him during that way. The poskim say that's also called demanding, and that he would have to pay. Okay, that's pretty simple. Only if he demands it. If he doesn't demand it, it's fine. Number 4, which is through an agent. So what's the reason? And then we have to understand what's the reason why if you're hired through an agent. So there's no mitzvah. What does that mean? So he's my agent. Shlucho shel adam kamoto. In all of the Torah we find that an agent is just like the person himself. So there's 2 reasons why an agent, why a shaliach is the one who's hiring, one doesn't violate the prohibition. The first, Rashi says in Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, the first Rashi, Velo karina be pe'ulato itcha. It's not called itcha. In other words, it's a special gzirat katuv. The Torah stipulated that only if you personally hire, if it's through an agent, even if it's exactly the same shalucho shel adam kamod, it doesn't matter. The only prohibition and the only mitzvah is when it's directly you and the worker, not with an intermediary. The Tosfot Rid mentions another reason. The Tosfot Rid says that the reason why one doesn't violate any prohibition of baltalin when it's through an agent is because the worker doesn't have the same trust and the same smichut dat. He doesn't rely that the boss is going to pay him with an agent. He says, okay, if he has the money, he didn't tell me himself. I'm going to go tell the boss. He's going to say, well, I don't know. I never said this and this and this. So the worker doesn't rely on it. But let's say the worker goes back to the shlich and he says, listen, I want you to get a guarantee from the boss. And he says, okay, I went to the boss, I got a guarantee. And the worker is the one who initiated, and he says that he knows that the boss is going to pay him, and he relies on it. It could be in that case that even if it's through a shliach, one would have the prohibition of baltalin. It's a suffix. What reason we paskin like the Tosfot Rid and Rashi, the poskim say one should be machmir when the shaliach, when the person knows that he's for sure going to get paid. And the same thing applies with employment agencies. Employment agencies are not the direct ones hiring, and also a lot of times it's the principal or the CEO or the or the manager, but it's not necessarily the boss who's hiring, there's no prohibition of baltalin. If it's not the direct owner doing it, there's no prohibition, which applies to a lot of people in big companies, that the big company never hires himself, it's always through an agent. That's what it says in the Gemara, that two Amuraim, when they would both need workers, one would hire for him, and one would hire for the other one. That way, that they both do it for each other. So the question is, and I was discussing this with some of the Avreichim here, do we still have the positive commandment of biyomot titen secharo if we pay our worker on time, even if it was done through an agent? In other words, despite the fact that I don't have the negative commandment, do I still gain the positive commandment? I wasn't sure. I think when we learned it, I know we discussed it, and I think some poskim say you do have that positive commandment of biyomot titen secharo. Anybody remembers anything specific to this? I think one does. Okay. Two more details, and then we're going to call it a wrap. Which is the Shulchan Aruch discusses what's considered a sale and what's considered a worker. If I give a worker a lot of wood in order for him to make me a beautiful kli, is that a worker, or is that he's selling me a kli? So if somebody's a carpenter and I give him a lot of wood to build me a shed, and he gives me the shed and he charges me a certain amount of money, am I paying him as a worker, or he built the shed, it's his shed, and he's giving me the shed? And he's selling me the shed. So selling, obviously you have to pay for what you sell. If not, you're stealing. Whatever you buy, you have to pay for. But it's not part of this prohibition of biyomo baltalin and the positive command biyomot titen secharo. So the Shulchan Aruch says that when I give material to a worker, and a worker builds the house, en uman koneh shvach kli, the worker does not acquire whatever he is building, and it's not like he's selling it to you, rather he is a worker, and I would violate the prohibition of not paying him on time because he is a worker. However, Rabbi Akiva Eiger brings in the name of the Tshuvot Maharas Sasson, what about he's using his own material? I call up a sofer in Eretz Yisrael to write for me a Sefer Torah. And he uses his pen, his ink, his klaf, his parchment in order to write. And at the end of the time, he's going to say, this is the price of a Sefer Torah. Here's $30,000. Give me $30,000 and I give you Sefer Torah. And it's expected that he's paid at when he finishes his job, that you should make the transfer. So the Maharas Sasson says it's a sale. He says even though when I give him the material, it's not a sale, but over here he's using his own material. That is not considered a hiring. That's considered a sale, and one wouldn't be liable on biyomot titen secharo. That's called a sale. That's not called a worker. Same thing too, if somebody comes and he's going to install security systems, and he's going to install locks, and he's going to start cameras and everything else, he's bringing his own material, and at the end he says, this is the amount of money that you have to pay. So there's no prohibition of paying him late. He is selling you a product. The Maharas Sasson says he's selling you a product. He brought all the material. Part of the sale is the installment, but you weren't paying him for the work of the installment. You were paying him for the finished product that he's producing and that he's giving to you, that is installed in the house. And when he does that, you have to pay him like any other sale that you bought, any other stereo system. But
If he gives you a detail on the bill, that's for the material.
doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. The definition is that he is giving you a package that he's telling you. In other words, let's say I only want to pay you for the work, but not for the cameras. Doesn't work that way. It's all one package deal. Yeah. I know that we spoke about in a different sugya that sometimes you could split up the payment and the work, but I think regarding baltalin, the Maharas Sasson is saying that a sofer is selling you the Sefer Torah, and the same thing too would be in these type of systems. And there you have to pay a worker on time. You buy a suit by a store, so the suit has to be paid. I'm not saying it doesn't have to be paid, but there's no positive commandment of biyomot titen secharo, and there's no lo tavo alav hashemesh. Yes.
What about rent? If I rent a car, or I rent a house, or rent...
So rent is a sale. No, it's like a sale. It's not. Where could it be a worker?
It's just kelim, the rabbi's kelim.
Behem or kelim.
The rabbi's kelim.
Behem or kelim.
I mean, so
So if I rent out anything that's
Uh-huh.
Kollel, I have to pay on time.
rent out
Chayiv
metal.
and Chayiv.
And then karka is a machlokes, rent.
Karka is a machloket. Aha, because that's written in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so I think we covered. The four conditions and what is considered a sale and what is not considered a sale. So everyone should remember very well that before we ever hire workers, we should make sure if we are not able to pay on time, we should make such a stipulation. And otherwise, we could get into serious Torah prohibitions. Hashem should give us a lot of atzlacha, and be'ezrat Hashem, we should have the zechut of fulfilling these mitzvot and staying away from any negative commandments. The do nachat ruach liborenu, amen ken yiratzon. Rabbi Hananya ben Akasha omer, Atzah Kadosh Baruch Hu lezakot et Yisrael, lefichach yirba lehem Torah mitzvot shenemar Adonai hafetz lema'an sitko yagdil Torah v'yadir.